Hi, this is the GI tract diseases. I think this is part 4 now. Viruses, there's only two that we're covering, and these are the rotavirus and norovirus. So I have pictures to remind you, like the little tidbits. So for rotavirus, this is a really common infection for kids. You can see that's fecal oral, and the reservoir are other humans. Very, very common among children, although now there's a vaccination, so it's going to go down. Um, the CDC thinks that like 95% of the children have had at least one rotavirus infection by their 5 years old. And then there is memory produced with this infection, and adults are either immune or they have a slight illness. So this is our little picture of a child because this is more of a childhood diarrheal illness. And then we have norovirus, also sometimes called Norwalk virus in the news. This is caused by, again, contaminated humans. This is a little bit nastier. This is fecal oral. This can be also found on fomites. So it's direct contact with feces or vomit, touching contaminated surfaces, and also through contaminated foods. So it is fecal oral, but also because norovirus is really violent, it causes projectile vomiting. It's really severe kind of food poisoning that when people vomit, in this manner, there's an aerosol spray that happens. If you're near that, you can get contaminated by breathing those vapors in. You see these in infants and the elderly, but you also see norovirus a lot with closed quarters. So it's really prominent. I have a cruise ship here because you see a lot of rotavirus infections on cruise ships. The virus is not killed by disinfectants at standard concentrations, so transmission remains high. So let's say a person was sick with rotavirus goes to the bathroom on a cruise ship. There's cleanup afterwards, but the rotavirus is still present. And since we can touch contaminated surfaces to get it, we can see how easily it can be spread in a very small contained environment, such as a cruise ship where everybody uses maybe the same public restroom. So this is it, our norovirus and our rotavirus, food poisonings. Norovirus is highly contagious, okay, really contagious. And this is basically kids, mostly kids and elderly. So the next virus we have to talk about is going to be for the liver. These are hepatitis viruses. Now I have to say that they are all called hepatitis A, B, C, D, E. However, they are not related to each other. So the only commonality between them is they do select cells of the liver to infect and cause liver disease. And you can see that you don't need to remember this at all, but they are not even related in terms of naked versus enveloped. So we have a naked envelope, envelope naked. And then we also have RNA versus DNA. We have single-stranded RNA, double-stranded DNA, single-stranded RNA, the positive form of it. So no relation, just the fact that they cause hepatitis. So hepatitis in general is going to be a human virus for those who are asymptomatic carriers. For hepatitis, we have a general illness, right? So we have malaise, which is tiredness, anorexia, you're not hungry, loss of appetite. This kind of goes hand in hand. You don't want to eat and you have a lost appetite. There's dark urine produced because when you are injuring the liver is responsible for breaking down the hemoglobin. Okay, so let's just back up here. The red blood cells we have, right? The red blood cells, they are only going to be in our body for 3 months. They have a lifespan about 3 months. So every day, your liver and your spleen are breaking down the red blood cells that you made 3 months ago. And the molecule of hemoglobin inside this protein has to be converted into a substance that can be secreted or excreted from the body. And so the liver will take that hemoglobin and make something called bilirubin. Bilirubin has a greenish color to it. So that bilirubin, if it goes into the urine, it will produce a dark color urine. And that bilirubin will back up into the bloodstream. And then that will basically color your skin a yellowish color. The whites of your eye become yellow, and that is called jaundice. So when you see someone with jaundice, it basically indicates that they have liver dysfunction. All right, so that's our basic hepatitis. In severe cases of hepatitis, remember, so this hepatitis can be mild to severe. The most severe will be liver necrosis, and that your liver is so important to you, to so many functions of the body. You cannot live without a liver. So if you have liver necrosis, you either need a transplant or you're not going to make it. All right, so A, B, and C. We're only covering A, B, and C. A, B, and C are kind of in line of like severity. So A is the least severe. Hepatitis A is actually just a fecal oral food poisoning, and you have human carriers, asymptomatic carriers. The virus is pretty tough. It can survive on cutting board surfaces, let's say, for days. It can also be resistant to chlorinated water. And this is what you find a lot of times in restaurant outbreaks. A worker who is asymptomatic can contaminate surfaces in that restaurant, and it's going to be resistant to chlorine. So if we look at the infection, we have a lot, half of them, you don't even know you're infected with hepatitis A. You can have nausea, abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, all those same sort of things. Sometimes you can cause jaundice, right? So sometimes it does affect people enough where the jaundice occurs for 2 to 21 days. The nice thing about hepatitis A is that there's no chronic form. So once you have it, it's a very acute, short illness, and then you're done. Incubation time is 4 weeks, so that is a long time. If someone would ask you, did you eat at Subway 4 weeks ago? Maybe, maybe not, you would remember. But there's no specific treatment for a virus. There's no antibiotics, right? There are antivirals, but for this one, there's not. So your body will just take care of it. For hepatitis B, this is going to be a little bit more serious. The reservoir is, again, humans. And Hep B is going to be more in the fluids. So the blood is going to have the virus, semen, vaginal secretions. So basically sexual contact, you can get Hep B. The mother can pass infection across the placenta. This is another one that can cross the placenta. And then we have during birth. Newborns, there is a Hep B vaccine, and they can also be given those immune globulins, so that anti-serum, and they can be vaccinated. So the Hep B is going to give you a more serious disease of the liver. It does cause inflammation, which is called hepatitis. Basically, that is inflammation of the liver. But the hepatitis can be acute or it can be chronic. And so even though you see 90% of our HBV infections end in complete recovery, we can have a subset of that go to be chronic. When you become a chronically infected with Hep B, there's a very, very strong risk of liver cancer. And Hep B is one of the leading causes of liver cancer. You're 200 times more likely to get liver cancer if you have a chronic Hep B infection. So because of this risk, because it is found in blood, those people who work with blood or semen or any kind of bodily fluids, the healthcare agency you work for should offer Hep B vaccines. You should take it. Because you don't want to mess with a chronic infection of hepatitis B. It can really lead to, liver transplant. That's a treatment. That's a pretty severe treatment, right? You're at the end of the rope there. Okay. And then this is Hep B. So this is how vaccines are so wonderful, right? So here we have our vaccines first issued in 1982, right? And then we had the levels go up and then down. Why the levels went up, I'm not too sure, but the sort of, maybe it was just going up anyway, the trend was going up anyway. And if you look at the years in 82 to when it really started to go down, I would say right here, right? Really started to go down. Maybe that's, oh my gosh, I can't even read this because I'm not wearing my glasses. Welcome to my world, 1986, 87. So 5 years, okay? And then look at how the levels of Hep B have fallen over that time. So this is the, miraculous work. Hep C is the silent epidemic because a lot of people carry Hep C and don't know it. So it is a chronic infection. Look at this, asymptomatic and a long incubation time, up to 20 years. So people can have this for a very long time in their body. Transmissions, basically blood. Okay, blood transmission. So people who maybe share razors, unsanitary tattoos, IV drug use. Actually, IV drug use is the most See here, the most cases of hep C are from those people sharing needles. Very low risk of sexual contact, even though, but basically, if there is any bleeding or open mucous membrane during sexual contact, of course, that's a route of transmission. Um, it mutates rapidly. So this is why it's hard to manage hep C. It does mutate rapidly. It evades the immune system. They can't make a vaccine for it. I don't know how this is going right now, but they're having issues making a vaccine. So look at this, right? 85% go on to chronic infections of the liver. And then of those chronic infections, 20% will get liver cirrhosis or liver cancer. So cancer, we are familiar with the overgrowth of cells, right? Making tumors. But cirrhosis is this hardening and replacement of the liver cells with scar tissue. So cirrhosis or a cirrhotic liver is basically replacing all those healthy cells with like non-functional scar tissue, fibrotic tissue, and it's basically not functioning. So HBV and HCV are the main reasons for liver transplants in the United States, and you can see the difference between a healthy liver and a cirrhotic liver. Liver cirrhosis is also something that can happen to people who drink, basically alcoholics for a long, long time. The liver cannot keep up with all that toxin and will become cirrhotic. This is kind of a nice little, this was an ad campaign for hep C. If hep C was attacking your face instead of your liver, you'd do something about it, right? So kind of a nice campaign. All right, so this is our hep C, our hepatitis overview. Remember, we're not covering D or E, but those are the three you want to remember. All right, we're going to jump into protozoan diseases of the GI tract. So this is going to be an overview of many protists that can enter our body in different ways. We're not covering all of these, but let's take a look at some we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about Entamoeba histolytica. We're going to talk about Giardia. Trichomonas, we already talked about in the sexual, in the urinary and genitourinary chapter. But we also have Acanthamoeba here, we talked about in the eye chapter. And then we have Naegleria fowleri, Enterobius vermicularis. Yes, we're going to talk about that. And then in this chapter, I should have looked this over, right? We'll talk about here is Giardia. So in the mouth, we notice that Giardia can come into the urinary system or reproductive system and in the mouth. It's largely the oral route that we get infected with Giardia. And then we are going to see Entamoeba again. Entamoeba is also down here, but it's going to be more, we're going to talk about it as a fecal oral kind of infection. Yeah, and then we'll talk about some of these. Oh, Atania. This is going to be our tapeworm. Anyhow, just kind of a fun, how many ways can parasites get into us? Okay, so this is our Entamoeba histolytica. This guy causes amoebic dysentery. Here's that word dysentery. So we know we're going to get damage to the tissue lining and we're going to get bleeding. Humans are the primary host, fecal oral transmission, and again, mild to severe. So with protists, right? Remember with protozoans, some protozoans have a trophozoite form, right? So this is a living, breathing, using energy, right? Energy comes in, waste products out. This is a trophozoite. Then under conditions that it doesn't like, right, it could go dormant. So this is a cyst. So cysts are really, they protect themselves with coatings, with thick protein shells, with different factors that make them resistant to killing. So most of the time when you find protozoans in the wild and you get infected with them, you're not usually taking in the trophozoite. The trophozoites are usually too wimpy and they get killed by the stomach acids or just, they're just killed, stomach acids and other factors. But if you cook the food or cook the water, they'll die. But cysts won't. So you do ingest the cyst. The environment of the small intestine will stimulate excystment. So it comes out of the cyst. And then one cyst will make 4 trophozoites. So it's basically, and then it divides you at 8. So it's basically this like logarithmic, reproduction in your gut. Then they are swept into the large intestine. The amoeba will feed on your tissues, and that's why you get the bleeding because it dissolves your tissues, and you have severe diarrhea with blood and mucus. So that's our amoebic dysentery. And then I know that Entamoeba histolytica was part of our lab exam. So just another look at this guy. A trophozoite will have a ring dot nucleus, and so will the cyst actually, but you can see this amoeba and it has a ring and then a dot, that's its nucleus. And it's because the way that the chromatin, which is the DNA, arranges itself. And it has a karyosome in the middle. But, this is what we saw in lab pretty much. This is a very nice big picture. This is a little guy, and you can kind of see here a ring dot, and there's another ring dot. Not uncommon to have more than one nuclei. Our next protist, or protozoan, I should say, is Giardia lamblia. And Giardia is a lot of times associated with like campers or people living in the woods for a while. The reservoir, many animals can carry this in their gut. So beavers, hence the name beaver fever, cattle, coyotes, cats, humans. And so what happens is it does infect your gut. It produces cysts in your large intestine, and then those cysts come out in the feces and it can contaminate different areas. If you are camping, like in this picture, these animals can, when they go to the bathroom, it can contaminate the waters. And if you drink the water without treating it, you have a chance of drinking all kinds of stuff, including the Giardia cyst. So fecal oral, you're ingesting the cysts in contaminated food and water. It's a very hardy, right? Can survive 2 months in the environment, in the soil, water surfaces. It's considered a foodborne illness. You do have chlorinated water supply. It does survive chlorine. So that's why a lot of our pools, right? The chlorine is there to prevent microbes from growing. And Giardia is one of these things that they have in mind when they put the chlorine in. And so the symptoms of Giardia are actually quite interesting. There is a distinct sign of Giardia, which is the feces has a hydrogen sulfide smell, and it is a very greasy stool, because what Giardia does is it blocks the absorption of nutrients while it's in the small intestine. And then it can specifically the fats are hard to absorb. And so the fat, if it's not being absorbed, it ends up in your stool. And so it causes this greasy, I've also heard floating stool. And the symptoms can last a really long time, 1 to 6 weeks. 1 week of diarrhea is enough. 6 weeks of diarrhea that's intense, right? All right, so moving on to the Helminthic infections of the GI tract. One little thing about worms, or a few things about worms. A lot of these helminths, right? These are large animals. We're not talking about single-celled organisms anymore. So in order for them to live in a host, they have to be very good at hiding from the immune system, and they have to be very good at being quiet. So, to stay inside the intestines, right? The intestines are always moving food. Peristalsis is this rhythmic contraction, always trying to move things out, sweep things out. So in order to stay inside the intestines, they have to have a specialized region that does hold on to the intestinal wall or whatever organ they are infecting. So like a fluke will have a sucker, tapeworms will have a sucker and hooks. So they all have ways to stay inside the intestine. Some of them can actually liquefy and penetrate tissues to move around. Some of them have a cuticle. So this cuticle is going to be a covering that has nothing for the immune system to see. It's basically a cloak, right? So there's no antigenic proteins on this cuticle. The immune system, it's basically invisible to the immune system, so it leaves it alone. And even though they're really large, they don't produce many symptoms. They're very good at being parasites, so they can stay in the host longer. Here is an image of the tapeworms. So back in the, and I should have looked this up, but if you look it up, people did eat tapeworm eggs in order to have a tapeworm because it helped them lose weight. So it was a weight loss fad for a second. Okay, so immunity. You know that our immune system is working against parasites with eosinophils. So I'll play this. We saw this before. I just think it's a really cool video how all those eosinophils are really just piling on that worm. So let's pause it. So yes, we have our eosinophil, but you see how tiny they are and how large the worm is. So they have a limited capacity to destroy worms. Antibodies are formed to worms sometimes, but they're not lasting. Reinfection's a possibility. Vaccinations are not useful because the immune system doesn't respond well against these large parasites. Remember, vaccinations are going to activate your T cells and B cells. B cells make antibodies and they're not that great. T cells are limited to your own cells, like your abnormal self cells, so it's not going to be good against worms. So vaccinations are not useful for really big worms. So worms cause, the immune system is unable to rid the worms from the body because they're so big. Sometimes worms move around, they don't stay in one location, and they can be somewhat inaccessible to the immune system. So if they're hanging out in a cavity, for example, your immune system is in your blood, it's in your fluids, it's within the walls of your body. But if the worm is sitting in the lumen, there is no immunity there in that space. So it's inaccessible to the immune system. All right, so worms are very common in the intestinal tract around the world, especially in poor sanitation areas. The damage done by worms can be done by feeding and destroying the tissue that it's on. Sometimes the secretions are toxic, and sometimes they just block the organs by being there. And this is our life stages. Remember, this is a worm, a big animal, so it does have an egg, all right? And then it has a larva when the egg hatches. It has a larva stage, or larvae, and then it also has an adult. Okay. So most of the time, right, we're not going to accidentally eat an adult worm because we can see that in our food or water. So most of the time we get infected with either the egg or the larva. These are the worms we're looking at. There's 3 categories of worms. There's round worms, flat worms, and then segmented worms, which are called annelids. We're not covering any segmented worms in this one, but there are 3 round worms. Round worms have a body which is like a pencil. So it's a nice round non-segmented body with a point at the end, also called the phylum Nematoda. And then the phylum Platyhelmintha or Platyhelminths, these are flatworms, and that their body is basically like a piece of paper, very wide, very flat to increase surface area so they can basically, your nutrients can diffuse into their body. Tapeworms and flukes are going to be the ones we're talking about. So this is hookworm. Hookworm is Necator americanus, is the one that we find in the United States. The reservoir is mainly humans, but some other animals can have hookworm. Transmission is going to be in the soil, so you have to be barefoot. You have to have some kind of skin that contacts the soil. The soil has the larva, and the larvae really like to live in feces-rich soil. So if there's any human feces, sometimes for people who are rural, right, they'll have an outhouse or they'll have an area and the soil might be contaminated with feces. So that's where these worms really like to live, or cats and dog feces, it doesn't matter. But when those larvae come in contact with your skin, they can actually penetrate your skin and move into your skin. So here's the eggs are in the feces. They get into the soil. The soil is nice and moist and warm. They turn into larvae. The larva is what burrows into your skin. When it gets into your skin, it moves into the bloodstream. Okay, so if you look at here, it moves into the bloodstream, and then it does, so if you follow this line here, so adults, they're going to come from the stomach. All right, so where is this? I don't know, I can't see very well, but it does move from the blood to the lungs. Then you cough it up, and then you swallow it back down, and now it's in your stomach. And then it goes into the intestines where it becomes an adult. So the larva enters your skin, migrates to your lungs, up to the throat, you swallow into the stomach. That's where the adults are going to be found. So the adults will be male and female adults. They're going to make eggs. The eggs are released in your feces. And then when the feces, it hits the soil, right? So if you're going to the bathroom with a toilet, you don't have to worry about contaminated soil. But in areas where you're using the bathroom on the ground, you can get the larvae forming and then they penetrate your feet. All right, and the next worm is going to be our pinworms. Pinworms are really common in children. Again, human reservoir, fecal oral. The kids, the eggs that are produced. Let's maybe talk about this first. This pretty graphic image here. So the eggs get into the kid's mouth through the fecal oral route. So when the pinworms mature into males and females, they are in the intestines, and then the females, and usually at night when you're sleeping and your body is still, they travel to your anus and they lay their eggs outside. And this process causes a lot of itching. So if you're a sleeping kid, you have itching, you're going to scratch it with your hands. It might get underneath your fingernails, and then you have those eggs under your fingernails, which in the morning contaminate other things. You can also put them in your mouth and you can reinfect yourself. And because of this behavior, one of the things they do is this sticky tape method for detecting the eggs, which is they do take just a cellophane tape and they push the tape against the anus area, the perianal region, and then they look at it under a slide. This is a pinworm, so you can see how tiny they are, and they're basically looking for those eggs around your anus. So back to this, right? The eggs can be in the air or the dust. Eggs are really sticky. They can come into your fingernails or fomites, especially the bedding. They can reinfect you if you were to put your hands in your mouth or to any other person. Okay, so common worm disease in kids. Some cases are asymptomatic, but mostly it's that itching around the anus. That's the big hallmark sign of pinworms. Moving on to Trichinella spiralis. This worm is going to cause trichinosis, and trichinosis is probably the thing that where people who don't like to eat pork or undercooked pork is scary to them. It's usually this. So the reservoir for Trichinella spiralis is going to be domestic and wild pigs, right? So pork. Other species that have this are bears and wild horses and rodents. And actually, if you look at the bear meat is the source of 1/3 of the cases in the United States. I haven't heard of anybody eating bear meat, but it does exist, I'm imagining. So what happens in this one is unusual because this worm, when it gets into a host, it actually leaves the intestines and it likes to burrow into tissues, and it just kind of lays there as a cyst. So the larval stage is encapsulated or we call it encysted. It's not, so I mentioned it's not the same as a protozoan cyst, but it is kind of a little bedroom or a little, container for itself. And so it just lays there in your tissue. So a lot of times it's in the muscle. Sometimes it can it can burrow into the brain, the heart. So it doesn't, always target the same tissue, but it does largely target the skeletal muscle, which is what we eat, right? So the pork that we have that's undercooked, if it does have a trichinella larva in it and it's undercooked, this would be alive and it could infect us. So humans are a dead end host because if you think about the life cycle of this trichinella, the reason why it does this is so that another animal, when it comes and eats the muscle, it will be transferred to another animal and infect another animal. But since humans, no one usually eats us. Every once in a while, you'll have a bear or a lion eat a person, but we are sort of like the dead end host for this worm. So if you read the symptoms, it's very mild. It can mimic the flu, headache, muscle pain, conjunctivitis. Severe symptoms would occur when you have this encystment in different, like important parts of your body, right? So lung or heart or brain. So the life cycle, again, is entirely in the body. The larva will exist when exposed to pepsin and acid in the stomach. So that's cool. If you have some undercooked pork, this guy gets into your stomach. The stomach has pepsin and acid, and it basically stimulates this guy to come alive, come out of its cyst, and then move to your intestines to have those adults there. The adults will mate, produce more larvae, and then they're going to migrate to other parts of the body and then form a cyst. And what you're looking for this kind of infection is going to be harder to detect because in this life cycle, there's no eggs produced that are going to be found in the feces. So an O&P exam can't be used for this sort of guy because you're not releasing any larvae or any eggs in the feces. So this is what it looks like, in a slide. So you can see all these larvae forming these circular encystment areas. All right, next up is our tapeworm infection, or taniasis. So you can see Taenia solium is pork tapeworm, Taenia saginata is beef tapeworm. So that word Taenia refers to the genus that is basically a tapeworm. Don't get it mixed up with tinea, right? So if I were to say tinea is a fungal infection of the skin, right? A dermatophyte. So that's different than Taenia. So how do you get tapeworms? You would have to eat undercooked meat. Either larvae or eggs can cause contamination. And basically, if the larva in the beef is ingested, eggs in the pork are ingested, larvae in the fish, it depends on the tapeworm. So tapeworms each have their own little life cycle that's specific to them. We're just going to talk about the beef tapeworm here. So there's two hosts for the beef tapeworm, cattle and humans. Humans are the definitive host. What that means, right? This is a review. That means that sexual reproduction occurs in the definitive host. The intermediate host is a host where you might have reproduction occur, but it's not sexual. It's going to be asexual. So humans are the definitive host for this tinea. I should say Taenia. The scolex, so what we're looking at here is the head of the tapeworm. And it has those hooks here to stick to the mucosal lining. It has your oral suckers here to hold on to suction the lining of the intestines so it doesn't move. It grows in the intestines. It can grow really big, 4 to 8 meters. Each segment of the worm is called a proglottid, and a proglottid is it's just an egg making machine. It has male and female parts in it. It's just going to make eggs. And every time that a worm grows, it adds another proglottid. And I'll show you the picture here, right? So this is our tapeworm. This is the head, which is the smallest part of the tapeworm. And as you move away, right, the body, it's just all repeating units. These repeating units are proglottids, and it's just gonads, egg-making cells, sperm-making cells, and all the eggs are produced inside a proglottid. So tapeworms are just an egg-making machine. These guys are going to be released in your feces. The eggs, right, are going to be released into the environment. And if it happens to be in the natural environment, you can have a cow eating those eggs. And then the larvae are going to be burrowed into the meat of the cow. And then if you eat a raw burger and the meat had this kind of larvae inside of it, then you can get a tapeworm. So I want to show you, this is a tapeworm. So this is, you can see how long it is, taking it out of a person's mouth, because unfortunately the gastrointestinal tract only has 2 openings, mouth or anus. So you just have to choose which one you're going to go through and get that tapeworm out. This is a cool picture, I think, of a tapeworm. Notice that the head, the scolex, is here, tiny, tiny. And as it moves away, the proglottids just get bigger and bigger and bigger. This is what it looks like in your intestines. It's a little cartoon. And when you go to the bathroom, all these proglottids break off and they are found in the feces. You can see the proglottids here. You can see the eggs, right? These are all the eggs inside the proglottid. And a lot of times these tapeworms are so good at being quiet in your body, you don't know that you have a tapeworm infection until you see these sections of proglotid in your feces. All right, our last one here is going to be I think it's the last one, liver fluke, Fasciola hepatica. There's a lot of flukes out there. This one in particular, we're just talking about Fasciola hepatica. So flukes are flat. They look like a little leaf. They're going to have suckers. I think this looks like a sucker that suctions to the organ of choice. So our domestic and wild animals, such as sheep, cattle, goats, and deer, can have flukes. And then the way we get them, so flukes are interesting. This has a intermediate host. So they ingest raw or undercooked freshwater fish. How do we get something that comes from sheep, cattle, goats, and deer, and then we get it from eating fish? I'll show you. Or watercress, or waterborne freshwater plant, or contaminated water. So let's take a look at that first. So the life cycle of a liver fluke, this cow is a cow, or this could be us. All right. So this is what would happen in our bodies if we were infected. So let's start with the eggs in the feces. So we have eggs in the environment. The eggs have to find water, because in the water, there is an intermediate host, the snail. The snail, there's 3 life stages that pass inside the snail. So the snail is a really necessary part of their life cycle. And then there's a larva form that leaves the snail. So these terms you don't need to memorize, Miracidium or Cercariae. But these forms are the ones that are going to colonize the plants. So this might be the watercress. Or if you're a fish, right, the fish can eat. Oh, let's use a different color. So the fish, right, I'm sorry. There's a fish, right? So the fish, if it were to take in this guy, right, and you eat the undercooked fish, you can get infected. But either way, either if you were to take in the contaminated water with these guys, you can eat the freshwater watercress with these guys, or fish that have been contaminated as well, right? So either 3 of those aquatic features come in to our intestines, and there the cysts will hatch into immature flukes. I forgot to mention that these little guys do form a cyst. They go to the liver. So there is a drive or affinity for the liver, and they migrate there, and they basically live there. The adults will arrive at the bile duct, and then they will start to lay eggs. So it's interesting. They're called liver flukes, but they do spend a lot of time in the liver, but then they do sort of migrate to the bile duct, and that's basically their like retirement home, and then they basically lay eggs there, and that's where you find them in the feces. So the bile duct, if you remember from your anatomy, you have the small intestine, all right, coming off of the stomach. So this is the pyloric sphincter. So this is the small intestine, and the small intestine will receive input from gall bladder. This is the bile duct. So the bile will come in this way, right? And then the pancreatic juice comes in this way. Anyhow, so the flukes, the eggs are hanging out in this gallbladder. And so when the bile comes in to your food, it's going to carry those eggs. And so from the small intestine, obviously we're going to move on to large intestine and then out the feces. So that is our liver fluke cycle. In terms of symptoms, we have nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. You can have some breathing difficulties, and chronically, with the adult flukes living in your in your bile duct, you can have issues with the bile duct. So you can have cholangitis, cirrhosis of the liver, pancreatitis, organs in that area, cholecystitis, and gallstones. So basically inflammation of the gallbladder and liver and pancreas, all those areas here. And then this is a nice picture of a fluke inside of your gallbladder. That's it, guys. We made it.